So here's kind of the analysis that we go through. So based on a cash basis for fiscal 13, for 8 months of the year, July through February sales, if you take that, we're 4.69% over the same period the prior year. Year-to-date collections, because we do this actually, we'll record on an accrual basis, not a cash basis, so we lose 2 months of actual. That would lead to a 4.45% increase. If we look at a rolling 12-year change from year to year, it's a 5.24%. And then if we take a look at in fiscal 12, at this time through the year, what percentage of our total revenue have we calculated? That would lead to a 4.26% increase. And because of these numbers, we felt pretty good, especially with these two numbers right here, the top two, that we could go from the 4% to the 4.5%. And that's really how we made those projections. That's kind of what we do every year. And because we increased the fiscal 13 numbers by about 750,000, then we can increase the 14 number because that inflationary increase, although we didn't change it, will go up over that. However, again, the wild card on this was the TPT, which will now lower this by $1.9 million. But we wanted to show you how we got to our projections. On state shared sales tax, which is a large number, this is our favorite number because the state tells us the number. It's based on 2 years prior, so we know this is the number. So we're comfortable with the $53.1 million for 13 and the $57.8 million for 14, so we didn't change those at all. State shared sales tax, we go through the same kind of analysis that the first 4 columns here are what we showed you on March 5th. We projected that our fiscal 13 estimate we would increase by $3.6 million or 3.6% over 2012, which was a $1.5 million increase, and 4.5% the 14 budget is over the 13 estimate. We took a look at the actuals that were coming in. I actually had conversations with the state to say, what are you seeing? What do you know? What's going on because your projections don't look right? And we made some revisions based on that. So we basically did the same thing where based on what we did for these first 4 items here, I'll explain the next ones as we go down, we felt like we could easily increase our state shared sales tax from a 3.6% increase from 12 to the 13 revised to a 4.5% increase. And then we kept that the same for the 2014. One of the things that I wanted to point out on the state shared sales tax is a lot of times we look at the league's numbers and we kind of scratch our heads about why is it that we're not meeting these league estimates? So I talked to the state and I said, how do you come up with your numbers? Because we're never seeing your same numbers. Because we went through the same process of where are we on a cash basis? We're about 4% above. Where are we on an accrual basis? About 4.5. If you look at the rolling average, we're 1.6 above. If you compare year to date, where are we? We're about 4.3. So we look like we're in the ballpark about that 4.5%. So I talked to a lady at the state that distributes this revenue, and she said, no, you're right in the ballpark about 4.5% because that's what we're seeing. And I said, well, but your 2013 league estimate was 6.58% higher. And she said, well, that doesn't make sense. So she asked me to read what the league sent out, and she said, what happens is it's a timing change. So they prepare their estimates very, very early on for the league. And she says, if you want to have good numbers, call me back after July, and I'll tell you good numbers. So in July, or even earlier than that, but after the league had sent out their original estimates, they revised their estimates down. And the league never sent out a revision. So if you take a look at where we would be if we use the 13 league estimates, we should be at 6.58% increase. But if you take a look at what it would be based on her revised estimates, 4.55, and that's what she's actually seeing. So we feel very good that our estimate for 4.5% increase of our 13 revised over 12 is a very good number. And we think that will continue going into the next year, so we kept that stable. Oh, vehicle license tax. I said income tax was my favorite. This is my least favorite, and that's because this is where we have deviated the most from the state estimates, and it's a very difficult number to project. So I tried to provide you a little more information on this revenue source because it really is the one with the wild swings. We call it auto-lieu here. I don't know what the history of that is, but vehicle license tax is revenue paid based on the value of the vehicle, and the value of the vehicle is the sticker price or the manufacturer's suggested retail price, not what is actually paid on the vehicle. As your vehicle ages, the value of the vehicle is reduced 16.25% per year. So your VLT amount will be less, 16.25% per year. So as people aren't replacing their cars and the cars are getting older in the fleet, the revenue goes down. So statewide, the total vehicles in the statewide fleet are 6 million vehicles. At the peak of vehicle sales, we were replacing vehicles in that fleet about 400,000 per year. Some of those were new to the fleet, some were replacements, but 400,000. So now if you read information from the state, they're seeing double-digit vehicle sales increases. But what you have to remember is that's a double-digit off of a very low number. So even though they're saying double-digit increases, they're still at only 150,000 new vehicles per year. So it's going to take a long time to get that old vehicle fleet kind of off the streets. So we're getting more tax. The other thing that he told me was that the state sales are strong, but Pima County is lagging. We are not recovering on our vehicle sales as much as the rest of the state. So we do believe that we will recover in this area because we're starting to see it. However, we just don't know what the timing of that is. So potentially we can add back probably a $1.5 million to this revenue item from what we presented to you on March 5th. So a little more information on this revenue source, because I know it is fascinating, is the league estimate for vehicle license tax in 2012 was $20.6 million. We collected 19.7. So they were $800,000 high on their estimate, or 4%. 2011 was the same story. They were 6.6% high on their estimate, which was $1.4 million loss. So if we went with their numbers, those would be the adjustments we'd make. The other thing that I found out is related to the league estimates is when they get the number from the State Department of Transportation sends them the number, they take that number and they divvy it up, their estimates based on population. But the revenue isn't distributed just based on population. It's distributed both on population but also the county in which you live. And because Pima County sales are slower than the rest of the state, that's a problem. And also our pool of vehicles is getting smaller. It used to be 13% of the total $6 million, or 6 million vehicles. Now it's only 12.8. So our pie is getting smaller. It's not growing as fast as the rest of the state. Less people are driving and less people are replacing their vehicles here. And our population isn't growing as fast, is a big piece. So the current revenue trends that we're seeing, although the league estimates for 13 are that the revenues will be flat, we are seeing still large declines in this revenue source. So this is basically to take a look at where we are with vehicle license tax. So what we presented to you on March 5th was we took basically $1.5 million out of this line item. Fiscal 12, we collected $19.7 million. We reduced it to 18.2. That's a pretty large reduction of $1.5 million, or 7.8%. And the reason that we did that is because that's what we're seeing. We have no data to show us that it's going to be any different than that, other than the conversations, anecdotal conversations with the league, which we think will impact us, but we just don't know when. I can tell you, we got revenue new numbers this morning on vehicle license tax. We're now down 11%. So it hasn't started to turn yet. But if you look at the cash basis collections, we were down 6%. On an accrual basis, we're down 21%. And I just said we were down now 11% year to date with this next month added. Year over year, we're down 1.8%. And as a percent compared to last year, it's almost 9%. So that's why we're projecting to be down 7.8%. Are we going to be right on that? I don't know. I mean, I do think it's going to start to recover, but I don't know when, and I don't know how long it's going to take. So in March, we showed you going down to 18.2 million and then staying flat for 14. What we have in this budget now is going down the same 1.5 million for 13, but we have it added back again in 14. So we've put ourselves back to the 2012 level. So I know that was a lot of information in a quick time frame. Good. So the state shared revenues, if you look at it combined, you know, there's been kind of winners and losers, but from 2010 to 2014, we had $125 million in 2010. With all three combined, and we're about $122 million for fiscal 14. So we've basically caught up to that level. We're not back to 2008, but we're making good progress in those areas. Lastly, I wanted to point out, well, I guess not lastly, but almost lastly, that our general fund revenue projections, I know we've said this before, we make those in the adopted budget 15 to 17 months prior to the end of the fiscal year. It's 15 months for those revenues we don't accrue, so all of the departmental revenues, but 17 months for the big tax revenues. And we do it based on 6 to 8 months of actuals. So it's not a bad idea to be conservative. And I think at this point we're actually not conservative. I think we're really probably realistic. And we have a good practice of, during the revised budget, we have more data. We now have 7 to 9 months of actual data, and we're only projecting forward 3 to 5 months. So we kind of true them up at that point, and that's worked well for us in the past. However, this chart shows you what I wanted to do is take a look at our total revenues, and I took out the debt service, and I took out use of fund balance, because those make wild swings. And I wanted to compare where we were with the adopted budget, the revised budget, and actuals. And you can see very clearly the impacts of the recession. So in 2010, our adopted budget said we would have $448 million. And the recession was much deeper and stronger than we thought. So we got to the revised and we said, oh my gosh, we need to make some adjustments here. So we went down to 437. We didn't go far enough. So we went to 423. However, at that time, we didn't know where the bottom was at that point. So when we did the 11 budget, we were at 409. We actually started to see the uptick. So we started to revise our budget upward again because things were starting to look good, although we were cautious. So our actuals were 422. So you can see in 10 we didn't cut enough on our revenues, and then in 2011 we didn't quite add back enough because we were still guessing on the recovery. In 2012, when things started to stabilize, we were pretty close in our revenues, and this is all revenues, taxes and departmental revenues. We were pretty close. So we feel pretty good about where we are in 13 at this point. I believe, again, that these numbers are realistic. I don't think that they're conservative. But that's just my opinion. So I just wanted to show you some comparison information there. So in summary, this chart shows you the impacts of the changes that we made that I just talked about, not including the HB 2324, because we didn't know it when we had to submit the PowerPoint. But we added $750,000 back in the sales tax line, which will be reduced by $2.1 million from HB 2324. State shared for 14, we increased $400,000, and vehicle license tax, we increased $1.5 million. Those are those general revenues. On the property tax revenues, this chart shows you our property tax rate. You can see our primary property tax rate is going from 0.4125 to 0.5245. It's a 0.1120% increase, and I'll explain that on the next slide. Our secondary property tax is going from 0.8514 to 0.9054. So you can see there it's a 0.0545, which means it's $5.45 per $100,000 of household. And that's related to the issuance of the GO bond. And as you know, when we went through the GO bond process, we were telling people that number would be below $18 per $100,000. So it's $5.45 for that piece. In total, the property tax is going to increase 0.1665 or $16.65. So the primary reason for that is the primary property tax, as you saw, and I wanted to let you know that that includes the tort liability reimbursement, which for the 2014 budget, it's based on 2012 claims. So $3.2 million is included in that number. It was $1 million the prior year. So that's the majority of that increase, the 0.1032, or $10 of the increase is related to that tort. The secondary increase, again, is related to the GO bonds, issuing the $20 million worth of own bonds as the ballot vote allowed us to do. So combined, it's $16.65% or $16.65 increase on a $100,000 actual value of a home. So that's the property tax. There will be a public hearing on the primary property tax rate May 21st, and the adoption of the property tax levies on May 11th or June 11th.
Moving on to the general fund expenditures, this pie chart just shows you how they're divided up by department and area. The police at $148.5 million comprise 32% of the general fund budget. Then it moves on to the fire at $88.1 million at 19% of the budget. I'll point out the non-departmental area at $50 million is another large segment of our budget that is comprised of general expense, which also includes the retiree medical payments in that area. It's comprised of our debt service, and it's also comprised of our contracts and funding support, aka outside agencies. And then as you see in the upper left corner, the mass transit, $43.3 million, is 9% of the $466 million. Next slide just indicates 65% of our recommended general fund operating budget. The operating budget is programmed towards staffing costs, salary, wages, pension, medical, etc. A lot of this information on the next couple slides you've already received from the chiefs and from Mr. Gray on the 27th of March. Just to remind you that we do have 2 COPS hiring grants in place for Tucson Police. They fund 75 commissioned officers. Their authorized commission staffing is at 998, which is the same as fiscal 13. They were able to purchase 15 new vehicles this year from assigned fund balance. However, their aging fleet continues to add to their increased costs on those vehicles. Their overtime budget has been budgeted up to cover their current trends, and their alternative response callback unit for lower priority calls is in place. Tucson Fire, we've talked about the Alpha trucks providing more efficient delivery of services. The alternative service delivery is able to distribute the call loads better and increase their response times. The 911 Communications Center is piloting the shift schedule change. A system administrator is being reallocated from a vacant position to oversee the technical aspects in the comm center. And their staffing remains the same as fiscal 13 at 619 authorized commission. And as you know, a recruit class just recently graduated in February. Parks and Rec will maintain their programs at existing service levels. They're continuing their public-private partnerships, for example, with Bring Back the Splash in order to open 7 seasonal summer pools. The NC Dinos are using the Reed Park Annex, and CDBG funds are being allocated for parks and ADA improvements. That's out of the public housing or the federal funds that the Housing and Community Development Department receives. Their elephant habitat expansion is resulting in increased attendance and revenues. Moving on to the mass transit system, I indicated their total budget is $134.7 million. A lot of that, of course, is our fares and RTA. We've got $43.3 million of general fund in that budget in the recommended. That's an increase of $2.1 million over the current fiscal year. And as you know, options are being discussed to look at reducing that investment via some combination of revenue and cost measures, and we want to provide some long-term predictability in that number going forward. So again, to my renamed outside agencies, you can see the categories that those fund. There is $9.9 million in the recommended general fund budget. That does include the MTCVB and Pima Animal Care to contract for services, of course, with Pima Animal Care and the MTCVB, which we have to use our incremental increase in the bed tax dedicated to tourism, so we contract through that to the MTCVB. So that 9.9 is in alignment with the fiscal 13 allocations, and on page D213 of the recommended budget you received today, you will see exactly who those agencies are. No changes from last year. There is $500,000 in the Economic and Workforce Development RFP, and those agencies have not been selected and brought to you for approval yet. Just want to go back to last week's conversation about investing in deferred maintenance. At that time, you endorsed GSD's, the General Services recommendations to establish a continual funding mechanism for infrastructure needs. So an implementation plan in order to do that is being formulated. However, at this point, I want to point out to you that there is no funding, no additional funding in the recommended budget. What's in there is the money for building maintenance that the departments contract out to general services to do for them at a certain funding level, and custodial services. So that is the money that is in the budget. There has not been any additional money added to that. And a vehicle replacement program and a computer and equipment places are unfunded at this time. So moving on to the slides that the mayor mentioned at the beginning. Through our budget balancing methods that we pointed out to you on slides 21 and 22, there's a $2.3 million that we have budgeted in our non-departmental general expense area of the budget. It does not have any designated expenditure purpose at that time. It is backed up, as it were, by revenues within the $466 million. So we've developed potential options for your consideration and direction for potential use of those funds.
Marie, given the revision on the or the lease tax, that would now make that $4.2 million. Is that right, Kelly?
That's
Is that correct? Okay, thanks.
That's correct. If we increase the revenues because of the commercial lease tax being different from what we presented a couple weeks ago, there's additional funding of $1.9 million to add to that 2.3, and that would equal $4.2 million. So the potential options for that quote surplus would be to fund the self-insurance surcharge, which currently at this point we have suspended. That's $1.6 million towards the over $20 million deficit in the self-insurance fund. We could project our revenues differently or more conservatively than Kelly has gone over with you. So we could decrease some revenues throughout the revenue projection. That would eliminate that expenditure capacity. There would be no revenues backing it up. We could decrease other departmental expenditures, and we could add that capacity to fund other options. Number 4, we could fund the compensation plan as presented to you in the second item today. We could use money for a partial payment in paying the debt in the spring of 2014. Again, we have $13.2 million we're anticipating now of debt principal that we will not pay in the spring unless our revenues increase or our expenditures decrease. We could use it towards that at that time of the year. We could fund our infrastructure and vehicle needs that, again, don't have any additional funding toward them right now. Or we could set aside it in our rainy day fund, our financial reserves. So going forward, we have multiple challenges. There are planning efforts underway as best as we can be of things under our control. As I pointed out, we do have the ongoing structural deficit in the general fund, and also in other funds there are deficits and potential deficits looking forward. We are anticipating annual employee benefit cost increases, and if there's any compensation adjustments, it would again be a challenge to our structural deficit. We heavily rely on state funds, and we're susceptible to their legislative actions, unfortunately, and we can't control that. We have the expiration of the police cops hiring federal grant funds eventually. We also have the drop payouts for the police and fire commission staff coming up in the next fiscal years. We want to balance our investment in transit services and provide predictability in that dollar amount going forward. We're going to have ongoing O&M costs for the streetcar. We're going to have a payment to Pima County for PCUN operations, and we don't know how the federal sequester will impact our local economy. We need a self-sustaining program to address our infrastructure. We may have potential capital costs potentially to convert our golf courses to alternative uses and provide for O&M of whatever use that is. And we would like to build and maintain an adequate reserve level. This slide provides you a picture of those challenges going forward. We indicate this is the unassigned balance, assigned fund balance on the bottom, still on the positive level right now. In 13, we're projecting that possibly to be at $11 million at the end of 13, and assuming that we balance the budget the way we just presented to you, we would not touch that unassigned fund balance in 2014. We would still have the same level. However, as you see on the top, the red line are the projected expenditures going forward, and the black line is the projected revenues. Now we've built in, there's no compensation plan adjustment in this. The drop payouts are programmed in here. We are projecting new police and fire commission coming on that are currently the drop that we would have to start paying their pension on. There will be increased PSPRS rates we anticipate. This also anticipates that we would not do any debt restructuring. So as you see, it would creep into, if we had reserves in 2015, this number is in the red and continues to plummet downwards over the next 5 years. So you can already see that right there, that red shows you a structural deficit in fiscal 15 as of this moment, just looking at the way the expenditures are projected and the revenues are projected. However, we do have some opportunities. We have renewed our focus on economic development and annexation. You have an item on tonight's agenda on annexation. Our transportation improvements will incentivize property revitalization. We anticipate. We want to do some more strategic planning for future years. Obviously, we have to with that 5-year financial forecast you just saw. And we hope to have a good, strong, solid policy framework from your recent visioning process and from the Plan Tucson that will go to the voters in November. Just to remind you, per Arizona state budget law, that after the tentative adoption of any annual budget, and you will be doing that on May 7th, the total appropriations cannot be increased for the adopted budget. We will have the budget document online this afternoon. We're setting that up right now. And we are available to answer any questions today, during this next week, via phone, email, whatever. And we do have an hour set aside for April 23rd, so anything you would like to discuss then and you want to let us know now, we'd be glad to take that in. So thank you for your time.